Hello and welcome to Berry Aftercare. I don't know if you're listening on the podcast or if you're watching this video, but I want to welcome you. I'm Dr. Connie Stapleton. I'm a bariatric psychologist. Well, I don't even know if that's a thing, but I am a psychologist who specializes in bariatric medicine, and that is a thing. And I do that, and I love it. And I am creating content for people to help you so that your long term success after having weight loss surgery is even more likely. So, today I'm going to talk to you about a book that I found. And I don't know, sometimes either people recommend a book to me or I just kind of stumble across it. Don't know where I came across this one, but I've been reading it and I think it's really, really interesting. And the person who wrote it, named Claude Viens or Vines, Viens, has some really interesting things to say. And because Claude, I'm going to call him Veins. I don't know if that's correct because I think Vein is Vein. This is Vien. So I don't know how you pronounce it, but this dude has written this book and he suffered with weight loss and regain, weight loss and regain, weight loss and regain for a lot of time. And he figured out for himself what worked for him to get the weight off and keep the weight off. And I don't care however a person loses weight, whether it's through surgery or medical weight loss program or medications or a combination thereof, whatever. Losing the weight, as you know, is one thing, keeping that weight off is yet another. The title of his book, which tells how he came to understand the way to keep his weight off, is called The Most Powerful Weight Loss Device Ever Made, the Human Brain. So that's the name of the book. And I want to talk to you and just give you some quotes out of the book and share some of the information in here. And I think it's really great sometimes coming from somebody who isn't in the field of bariatric medicine or isn't a professional in the field and is someone who has walked the walk and done the work. So here's what he says about his book. He says he considers the book to be a kind of instruction manual on how the human brain can be used to overcome, and he says once and for all, that weight problem that's been haunting so many people for so long. So that's why he wrote the book. And he says he doesn't have any special training. He's not a doctor. He's not a dietitian. He's not a psychiatrist. He says he doesn't have any kind of degree. So he's not trying to make people believe that he is a professional of any kind. He says he really doesn't have any credibility other than the fact that he has done this work and he just wants to share what he found to be helpful for him. And as I read the book, there were parts of it I was like, well, I don't know how people are going to take this, but there are some really great and wonderfully helpful things that he has to share. So I'm going to start with his talking about how people guilt themselves and shame themselves and through the process of having weight and through the journey of trying to through trying to lose weight, and then if they gain it back, it's just a constant nightmare of guilt and shame. So he talks about the fact that no matter what you're doing, any kind of effort that you're making on a daily basis, even if it's just removing one thing from your diet, even if it's just saying, I'm not going to eat potato chips anymore, I'm not going to eat this brand of cookie, any kind of effort that's being made on a daily basis. He says, even if it's not that successful, should be enough to shed away the guilt and shame. I love that because I think so many people in our community are so familiar with and so used to, and by default, guilt and shame themselves. And half the time, they're not even aware of it. The last session that I had today was with a young woman. Oh, my dog just jumped. 30 years old. And she said she came into the arena of weight loss surgery because they were on a vacation with, multi generations, her parents, their parents' friends, their kids who are now grown, but they've all grown up together. And she said one of the women, her mother's age, pulled her aside and said, I've been listening to you over the last couple of days, and you may or may not be aware of it, but you really talk badly about yourself and how you feel about yourself because of your weight. And the woman I was talking to doing the evaluation for said, I had no idea that I made that many comments about my weight and how dissatisfied I am. She said, what I'm doing is trying to bring up the issue before other people do. So trying to make myself not feel as bad if somebody else mentions it. So the point that I love about this concept of any effort that you're making, even if you don't feel it's greatly successful, should be enough to shed away the guilt and shame. Because you hear me talk about effort all the time. It's absolutely essential to have any kind of success. And the success may be mental or emotional. The fact that you're putting forth some effort. Please work on catching yourself, being aware of when you guilt yourself or shame yourself, because that'll never get you anywhere in a journey that's a lifetime journey. So be conscientious of that. And then he goes on to say, and I really like this too, and I absolutely believe this, and I've heard it in a million different places. He says, if you want to become thin, then you have to think like a thin person on a permanent basis. So you've heard this said in different ways: fake it till you make it, act as if. And the point he's making is ask yourself, and I don't even know if I like the word thin, but you can do this in whatever way seems to feel best to you. If I were a healthy weight person, what would my choice be in this situation? If I were a person who ate to nourish their body as opposed to eating for a pleasure, what would I do in this particular situation? Another way I've heard this is from other motivational speakers or educators. They say if you want to be a rich person, then you do the things that rich people do. If you want to be a healthy weight person, then you do the things healthy weight people do. If you want to be a person with a master's degree, then you do the things that a person with a master's degree had to do to get it. So if you want to become a healthy weight, and a healthy weight doesn't mean the weight on the scale in the doctor's office. A healthy weight is a weight at which your body is as healthy as it can be. You're not struggling with a lot of comorbidities. And even if you do have high blood pressure or maybe high cholesterol, perhaps it's not a weight issue, but it's a biological issue. So if you want to become a healthy weight person, healthy weight for your body, where you're living a high quality of life and you're minimizing comorbidities brought on about weight, then you got to think like a healthy weight person. I think that is really critical. So make up your mind to develop a mantra or to remind yourself, what would a healthy weight person do in this situation? And any attempt, he says, it's back to that effort thing, that you take to get to the next step in the journey. All attempts made to take you to the next step should help you feel prouder and stronger every day. So let's say you decide you're going to exercise, and your exercise today is a whopping 5 minutes, either on a bike or a treadmill or going out for a walk or 5 minutes of stretching or resistance bands. Be proud of that. It's so easy to go, well, that was no big deal. That was nothing. I should be ashamed of myself that that's all I can do. That attitude, and remember, his book is about the most powerful weight loss device ever made, the human brain. So his whole philosophy is going, change your thinking about that. Rather than dissing on yourself for what you're not doing, be proud and appreciative and grateful for what you did do, so that as you get used to doing this, it'll take you to that next level of whatever it is. I literally had a friend who lost a lot of weight and kept it off for years. And she would talk about how when she first started exercising, it would literally be, and this is where I guess I came up with that example, 5 minutes on a treadmill. And she did that, she said, for probably a week or two before she was able to increase even by a minute. But she would do that until she could feel comfortable to increase. And that's how she did it, one step at a time. So it was to move her toward the next level. And let me tell you, this woman could out exercise me for sure. So that's exciting. Appreciate what you're doing, and it'll get you to that next level. So, the next comment that I highlighted in the book is although the body has tremendous self healing and regenerating capabilities, it is still very dependent on our actions. So, how we take care of others and ourselves is the main source of our well being. I can't tell you how often. It's funny because this happened today too. I was talking to a different woman earlier this morning doing an evaluation, but this just it highlights the fact that I hear these things on an everyday basis. I had a woman who was saying that she would get up and make breakfast for her husband before he went to work in the morning, but then she would go on about her work. She works from home. And maybe about 10 or 11 o'clock, she realized she hadn't eaten. And I said, so you make breakfast for your husband. What do you make? Bacon, eggs, nice breakfast. I said, what keeps you from having the same thing he's having while you're up making breakfast for him? And she looked like stunned, like she had never thought of that idea, or it had never occurred to her to feed herself or nourish her own body. It's raining. I don't know if you can hear that. Interesting. Okay. We haven't had rain for a while, and it looked like a beautiful day. Anyway, now it's raining outside. So, even though the body has tremendous self healing and regenerating capabilities, it's very dependent on our actions. So, she was taking actions to care for her husband. And this woman, at the age of 14, lived in another country. She quit school because she was taking care of her grandmother who had cancer. And she became very much a caretaker of a lot of people. She had a lot of chronic illnesses and not chronic illnesses in her family. And so she became a caretaker. So her identity now in her 30s was very much about taking care of other people. So we talked at that moment about the fact that when you constantly care for other people and neglect your own self care, what that message says. And basically, what it says is, you matter and I don't. I'll take care of you because that's what I do, but I'm not going to take care of myself because I don't matter that much. And she was just amazed by that. She was like, I never thought about it that way. And that is absolutely true. And I need to do a lot more in the way of self care. So that was pretty exciting. The next little section he has is on torture. And it's only like a 3 or 4 page chapter, but he's talking about how much torture there is if you're trying to do something, if you're trying to stay away from something like chips and you're at a party and there's a bunch of chips sitting there and you're all in the same room. And before too long, all you can think about are those darn chips. And they become torturous. You see other people sitting there and eating them and munching on them. And you're like, oh, I can't do this. And it's all you can think about. So the chips and not eating the chips become torturous. He says if refraining from eating the chips is torture to you, then you do not have the proper method. When you have the wrong perception of what chips mean to you, he says. I love this. Again, it's about using your brain and thinking differently. So if the chips are calling to you and all you can think about those chips and you're feeling tormented or tortured, he's like, you have the wrong perception of what those chips mean to you. That's what you need to work on. What is so tormenting to you about these chips? He says it's a mental state that's causing all of the commotion. Change the mental state, and the torture will disappear. You don't need to stop eating chips. You need to stop wanting to eat chips. I thought that was brilliant, right? Because if all you can think about is, I want those chips, I want those chips, I want those chips, the most dominant thought. You're going to move in the direction of those most dominant thoughts. And then you're fighting with yourself because if that's not on my diet plan, I can't have chips. They're not on there. So now you're in a sense of torture. But if you say, what do those chips mean to me? Are they going to bring me complete and utter happiness and joy? Well, maybe for 5 minutes they will. But what about after that? So he says, change your mental state. Stop wanting the chips. It's like, those chips mean nothing to me. They'll bring me 5 minutes of of, you know, tasting pleasure and maybe a little dopamine rush to my brain so I might feel better, but it's not gonna last. So stop wanting the chips. It's like, what are they going to do for me? And I really like that. So it's not about not wanting to eat the chips. It's not about needing to stop eating chips. It's about needing to stop wanting to eat chips. And I really think that's impressive. You'll have to think about that for a while, but it really does make sense. It's like if I quit wanting the chips, then I'm not going to have a problem. And stop wanting the chips by going, really, what are they going to do for me? Use that most powerful weight loss device ever made, your brain. The next section is about being accountable. We talk about this all the time, how incredibly important being accountable is. And he talks about how he's a very responsible person, but in this area, he hasn't been able to be very accountable. All right, so he's talking about taking blame or credit for things. And he uses the example of buying a house. So when you buy a house, he says there are a lot of risks. Interest rates could skyrocket and that would affect your finances. A tornado might be flattening your house and maybe the insurance won't cover it because tornadoes are exempt from the policy. Or if you go shopping, you're carrying your purse, your phone, you're exposing yourself to risk. Somebody might rip you off. If you have children, you expose yourself to all kinds of possible problems or situations that could be about. So he says, when you're born, you're exposing yourself to dying. And it's kind of a joke. It's like, okay, you're not responsible for being born. Um, but every time we make a decision, we're exposing ourselves to things. If you have weight loss surgery, you're exposing yourself to the fear of failure. You're exposing yourself to, you know, uh, possible dumping syndrome. You're exposing yourself to people asking you questions about what you're doing, right? So he says, what I'm saying isn't that you shouldn't buy a house or go shopping or have kids. But he says, buying a house, having kids, and breathing are really great things. They're the greatest things ever for a lot of people. So, what is this idea, he says, of taking the blame or credit for everything? He says, I know I'm exaggerating on this topic, that certain things do happen that are really out of control. But he says he's going to the extreme because he wants to make a point. He says the thought process here is when you put the blame on another person or situation, then you are saying you're a victim. So I gained weight because it's a genetic thing. Or I'm overweight because all the women in my family are overweight and that's just how we eat. Or I gained weight back because life got stressful. Or I gained weight back because, my kid was in the hospital. Or I gained weight back, blah, blah, blah. He says, when you put blame on anything external, you're saying you're a victim. You're a victim of your genetics. You might be a victim of the environment. You may be a victim of circumstances or society or the economics in the world. But what you're saying is there's nothing I can do to avoid what he says is the catastrophe. It's not my fault. I have no control over the situation. And I have an issue. This is not an issue with this book or this author. It's an issue with physicians primarily because I think what they're doing is trying to make themselves look more compassionate. But what they're saying to people is your obesity is not your fault. Your obesity is not your fault. It's not your fault. And I'm not saying it's all your fault, but there are aspects related to your weight that are a result of your contribution. You may have PCOS. You may take medications that cause weight gain. You may have genetic history for obesity. Absolutely. I'm not contradicting or questioning those things. But here's the deal. if you're relying on those things and you're saying, this is the reason I'm overweight, you're putting it off on something external. When in reality, I've met maybe 2 or 3 people who, if they were telling me the truth, absolutely did what they were supposed to do as far as eating and exercise and continued to gain weight. So the vast, vast, vast majority, 99 point something percent of people that I talk to for pre-surgical evaluations, yes, they have these factors. And I always talk about obesity as having a number of factors that go into the combination, the culmination of a person being obese. But there are things that you personally can do. So if you're blaming everything on external situations or people, then you're saying, I'm a victim. And you will forever remain a victim as opposed to a person who has some personal power. So you'll never control the situation. Oh, I'm I'm just like all the other women in my family and I'm overweight and I'm doomed. Therefore, there's nothing I can do. Now, let's say you reverse that situation, and this is what the author says. On the other hand, if you're to blame, if you are to blame for everything that happens to you, you also get to have the power to get yourself out of an undesirable situation. So maybe you didn't have the funds or the education or the skills or the information to avoid the problem, to avoid the fact that you did become obese or you have the disease of obesity. But you can take a look at what happened and take the necessary measures to turn things around. You're not going to be able to change your genetics. You're not going to be able to change too much, excuse me, your metabolic rate. You're not going to be able to change what other people in your environment eat. However, you do have the power to make whatever kind of changes you need to make to get the results you want. So if you have a genetic predisposition, if you have PCOS or insulin resistance, those things for sure are going to make it more difficult for you to lose weight. But what are the steps you can take, the processes over which you can assert control, like what goes in your mouth and whether or not you exercise? That makes you not a victim, but somebody who has power in the situation. And I think that is really, really, really brilliant. Oh, lost my spot here. Okay. Um, Oops. All right. So what he says to do here is you have the power to make whatever changes that are necessary to get ahead or get better or get well. He says, over the years, I've discovered that the best way to stop getting so upset at other people is to stop expecting them to fix my problem. Well, the doctor didn't care, and the psychologist, wouldn't let me come for free, and it costs a lot of money, and now I don't have money to buy healthy food, and stop getting mad at other people because they cannot fix this for you. This is a you problem, and that the problem of obesity has many, many components and many aspects, but nobody outside of yourself is going to be able to put forth the effort for you that needs to be taken. So even if you do have factors that you cannot change, there are factors that you can. So rather than focusing on those things that you don't have any willpower over, that's a bad word, but you don't have any options or any choice. That's taking the role of a victim. Don't be a victim. Adults have options. You are an adult, therefore, you do have options. All right, the next little segment he writes about, and he has these tiny little chapters, couple pages each, is perception. Oh my gosh, this is great because my real life work lends so much to this situation. Talking to a post-op yesterday, lost over 200 pounds, doing really, really great in her weight loss journey. But I've been working with this woman for a couple of years, and this woman has a perception problem, and she's becoming more and more aware of how her perceptions of things are negatively affecting her life. In other words, she's doing this to herself by how she chooses to look at things. And we all have a story, we all have a narrative that we tell about our life. And her narrative is no matter what I do, I'm always the one getting crapped on. No matter what happens, I'm the one getting crapped on. And I've come to this conclusion about her because it doesn't matter if she's talking about her work people. Somehow she always draws the short stick. Somehow everybody's always picking on her. Somehow nobody's giving her the credit she deserves. Same in her family. Somehow she is to blame when things go wrong. Somehow this is all her fault. And aren't they terrible and looking at me like this? Well, yesterday she was talking about a new situation. So when a theme carries over from one population to the next, so it's happening at work, it's happening at home. Yesterday she was talking about it in her friend group and how a group of their friends are going on this conference and they're going to be together and they're trying to make arrangements, and she came up with an idea and she said, and they laughed at me. And after that, their communication with me has been stunted and halted. And so I'm just not reaching out to them because they clearly don't respect me for this, or don't like me, or don't think I'm important enough, or whatever. And that whole perception thing came out. And so we talked about her expectations of people. Some of these things were really small, really petty. And I'm like, what is it about your perception of life that if somebody doesn't text you back, it means they don't like you? If somebody chooses to follow somebody else's guidance or perspective, that yours is wrong or bad. That's her perspective, right? And it's all in our perception, how we're doing, how other people think we're doing, what we see, what we don't. So he says we all have our own personal way of interpreting events, situations, information, and even other people. So you make up your mind about somebody or a situation, and I see this all the time in this population. It's really bothersome to me because we can't know for sure what's going on in another person's brain, or what they think, or how they would do it differently, or what's right or what's wrong. We have this perception that I'm the one that's failing, right? So we all have our personal way of figuring things out around us. The way it's presented to us and the way we perceive it, or rather the way we choose to perceive it, are two very difficult or very different things. So he tells a story about a guy who drives a BMW that he's driven for years, but he keeps running out of gas. And so every time he goes somewhere, he puts in just enough gas to get to where he's going. So it became kind of a running joke. So he went and he bought this car, and he avoided the brand of car because he said that brand of car always has an empty tank, which is really, really, really interesting. So the thing his perception is that this particular brand of car had a problem with its gas tank, and it was losing all of its gas. Well, that wasn't the case. What was happening is that his perception is that this brand of car always runs out of gas. Didn't look at the fact that he's the one that wasn't filling the gas. That kind of car always has this issue. No, that's not at all the truth. And he says, here's a false perception that most people have. Most people think that pies, cake, French fries, and ice cream make you fat. He said, nothing could be further from the truth. What? What is he saying? He said, you can enjoy these things without gaining an ounce in your weight. In the same way, you might have a glass of beer or wine with friends without any really undesirable consequences. It's all in perception, right? So what does that car mean to you? Or what does that glass of wine mean to you? Is it a threat to you? Is it going to lead you to wanting more? Take the time to analyze what's going on and what's contributing to your obesity, and think to yourself, does this have as much meaning to the population at large, or is this just something about me? So, um, all right, hang on. All right. Then he talks about staying in the day, and I like how he words this. And even though you've heard this before, and I've probably shared it before, there's something impressive about the way he says this. Because a lot of times you can put the effort right now, or you can wait till tomorrow. I'll wait till tomorrow. I'll wait till tomorrow. I'll wait till tomorrow. No, we don't want to wait for tomorrow. And the reason is tomorrow doesn't exist. Tomorrow, he says, is a hypothetical concept of what's to come in the future. It's a time that will be in the future that we have invented for planning purposes. He said, we need to know what's going on. We need a calendar. We need to be able to look at it so I can reel off when our ball games are, when our swim meets are, when our concerts are, whenever anything is. So that tomorrow business is to help with planning purposes. Things don't happen tomorrow. You don't go on a diet tomorrow. You don't um, you don't wait for veggies for tomorrow. You don't wait to tell him or her, oh, I love you. I just want to be with you. You don't wait because nothing ever happens tomorrow. Everything happens today. Everything that happens today because even what's tomorrow, tomorrow will be today, right? So ask yourself, what can I do now in this moment, right as it is? And then focus on whatever you do, that action that you take now, regardless, like I said, regardless of what that action is. If it's walking for 5 miles, if it's walking for 5 minutes, or if it's walking out of the store without a candy bar, or if it's being at home at night watching a movie and knitting instead of using your hands to eat, no matter what, it'll take you closer to your goal. And that is significant. That's new action. New action says, I can do this. I can maybe continue to do it. That might not be a good choice, but you can find out. So he says, ask yourself this question. What can I do right now? Not tomorrow, because tomorrow's not really going to come anyway. So what can I do right now, maybe right this minute, that will help me move one step closer to my goal? He says, no matter how small or insignificant, taking action now will trigger your mind into figuring out what the next step will be. Maybe you need to make a phone call, or maybe you need to go for a walk or send an email. Whatever it is, it'll get you into that motion, which is movement, motion, movement, motion, movement. Movement absolutely lubricates the joints. So you'll even feel better. So you can make things better, at least in your head. And your head, he says, is focused in the right direction, and anything is possible, which I really liked. All right. Now, he says, let's get back to this weight problem. How can I apply this perception theory? Thinking something is one way and maybe it's another, or thinking they don't like me because they can see that I sit down with this much food. It doesn't matter. What is your perception? He says, when he uses the example of smoking, he says, when you give up smoking, it's gone. It's gone. You can definitely look away and rule it out of your life forever. I don't smoke. You just can't do that with food, right? We can't just say, okay, food's gone once and for all, shoving it back in. No, because you have to eat to stay alive. He says changing your perception of food is a little more complicated because you have to do what he says, categorizing. I have to see certain foods as a good thing and other foods as a bad thing, right? That takes a lot of computing from one brain. We have one brain, and it's looking at this food, and these are why it's nutritionist, these nutritionists, nutritionists, And this is why it's not. All right. So it takes a lot of energy just to think about these things, right? I have to see foods as a good thing or a bad thing? Not really. Just let food be food. And this is where I got this. I couldn't remember where I got this, but it's right here. Instead of calling it food, I'm going to put food in my body, or it's time to eat. He says, I'm going to call it nutrition. That's it. Doesn't seem like that much of a big idea from when you pick up an apple and call it nutrition. That makes sense. Picking up a bag of chips and calling it nutrition, something doesn't feel right because the nutritional aspect of this has already been overlooked. So we all have a pretty good idea of what belongs in a nutritious category and what doesn't, right? So you can go into the subject, but the basics are there. In this one world we have, if you were to describe all that is edible, that can give me a new perspective about food. You could do that. You could make a list of all the foods. And he said, it doesn't matter what food you put in front of me, because with this mindset, with this paradigm shift, with this way of looking at things differently, you say to yourself, if it's not nutritious, it's not going in my body. If it's not nutrition, it's not going in my body. If it's not nutrition, it's not going in my body. And keep that over and over and over in your mind. It reminds me back of the chips, right? That might be what he's talking about. It's like, you got to have the chips. You got to have the chips. You got to have the chips. No, you don't have to have the chips. There's no law that says you have to have the chips. Think differently about the chips. They're not going to be nutritious to my body, so I really don't need to put that in there. So make it a little more meaningful, all right, by asking, what does this food do for me really? All right, then he goes on to a little section called the free karate lesson, which I'm going to skip because it's all about a little parable. All right, so the next section of the book is called overweight. No, it's not. Perception, overnight. And I really like this too. He says, he said, getting back to weight loss, the one question that changed my whole way of thinking was, if I got my hands on a miracle product that you and I could be thin just by taking the problem overnight, would you do it? What would happen? What would that change in your life or your life as a person? So he says, would I be willing to change my eating habits to go along with my new lean body? Let me think about that for a minute. If I have the long lean body and I continue to wear clothes that are too big or think that I'm overweight, that's not going to serve me, right? So consider changing the eating habits to go along with the lean body. So you're imagining that you have this lean body, this healthier body, and you literally close your eyes and imagine yourself as a lean person, and then you live like what that lean person would do. So he says he had to really ask himself what he wanted. If he wanted to go do something fun with the kids, or if he wanted, to stay in the hospital by his mother who was sick, right? He said he answered a series of questions that are in the book, and he said the answers really shook him up because he discovered that all he really wanted to be able to do was to avoid effort. I don't want to do it. You do it. To avoid effort and eat more of the foods I loved. All I wanted, he said, was to be free to indulge in forbidden foods and laziness full time. He just wanted to think about all the foods he wanted and think about, I don't have to do anything. He just wanted to chill out and eat food. So all I really wanted He said, so you got to really come up with your whys, right? He said, I had to get to thinking that I had to change my way of living, my way of being, my way of thinking. So if you're struggling with that up and down and up and down and up and down, and you ask yourself those whys, why do I want to have surgery? Why do I want to have surgery? Why do I have surgery? Then really answer that question in a positive way. So he decided he was going to change his thinking. He had to start thinking straight, which meant finding out the words he really wanted. He said, I wanted to go deeper into my thoughts and started asking myself, what would really, really, really make me happy? He said, when I came up with something, I asked myself, why would this new thing coming in, make me happy? So he said, I found out there's a huge difference between dreams and goals. So a lot of people tell me during evaluations, Dr. Stapleton, I would hope that, when I dream about this, I'm really thinking that. And what I say is hoping, dreaming, thinking doesn't result in anything. Action is required. So he talks about how it's impossible. We can have impossible dreams and not be stressed out by them because dreams are, it's what I want, maybe attainable, maybe not. But goals are what I want, and it should be attainable. We expect to achieve our goals. But this line of thinking can be positive or negative. Because if you set goals that are unreasonable and out of expectation, it sets you up to feel like a failure. But if you set goals that are attainable, it develops that sense of self-worth. So, even if the goal isn't quite accessible now, but you're doing something in the way of effort every day to move closer to it, eventually you will get there. All right, I'm going to stop there. We have half of the book completed, and we'll talk about the rest of the half of the book. Oh, I might do it tomorrow. I might wait till next week. I don't know. It depends what's going on. But that is good information, and I hope that the examples that I gave as we went through this really help you see a clear picture of how the most powerful weight loss device ever made truly is your brain. It is your brain all the way. So we'll pick up there where we left off. And again, the book is called The Most Powerful Weight Loss Device Ever Made, the Human Brain. So I thank you for spending your time with me today. And I just want to say, take what fits, leave the rest, but definitely be putting forth effort. And if your effort is this big today, let it be, because 2 weeks from now, it'll be this big plus that big, and we'll have a bigger effort. And it's going on and on and on. And that's how this works. All right, guys, that's it for today. Your health, your responsibility this day, every day. And if I look like I'm sleeping halfway through this, it's because I'm kind of half going to sleep. All right, I will see you next time.